This podcast is made possible by you, the supporters of WPLN and WNXP, Nashville Public Radio.
This is the Nashvillager Podcast. It's May 22nd, 2026. On this day in 1975, the U.S. Geological Survey attempted to determine the depth of the spring near Eagleville, where the Harpeth River begins. They were unsuccessful. Rumor is that Mount Vernon Spring, near Highway 99, has no bottom. That can't be true, of course. But over the years, efforts to determine its depth by lowering weighted ropes, lines, and chains have never found a bottom. Now, that probably just means the weights folks used weren't heavy enough to counteract the force of the water's underground flow. At ground level, the water from what seems to be a subterranean cavern surges from a limestone crack to form a large pool. The USGS did successfully measure the flow near the headwaters. At the time, it found the water traveled at a rate of 915 gallons per minute. I'm Nina Cardona, and this is your daily digest of what's happening around Middle Tennessee with context from Nashville Public Radio, WPLN News. The depth of that spring may still be a mystery, but the depths of many of Tennessee's rivers are not just known, they are pretty close to stable. That may sound like a no-brainer, but it's not quite the natural state of things. Rivers rise in rainy seasons and fall during droughts. A certain degree of flooding is not just normal, it can be healthy for the ecosystem. And as they travel through various kinds of topography, it's normal for them to have shallows in some places and deeper pools in others. But it is challenging to live by a river that periodically floods. Dams can help with that. When a river is deep in some spots and shallow in others, it can be hard to depend on it for navigation. Dams can help with that too. And the force of the water can be harnessed to provide power. To do that, you need a dam. Dams have substantially changed the shape of Tennessee's waterways over the last couple of centuries. For example, the Cumberland was once a very challenging river to navigate, thanks to shallows and snags at various points. In the 1830s, Congress appropriated more than $150,000, equivalent to about $5.5 million in today's economy, to improving the Cumberland for boat traffic. The Army Corps of Engineers started work on building small dams and smoothing out the channel in places. They didn't finish the job right away, though, thanks to the financial panic that shut a lot of things down. But in the 1870s, the Corps returned with a plan to build 30 sets of locks and dams along the river. By the mid-1920s, about half of them were in place, and they'd increased the minimum depth to 6 feet across the entire length of the river. Similar efforts were carried out in the Tennessee River to make the area around Muscle Shoals navigable, so the entire waterway could be used for barge traffic all the way upstream to Knoxville and beyond. And then in the 1930s, while many were thinking of dams as the best way to bring electricity to the rural parts of Tennessee, there was a huge, damaging flood. Stormy weather from Christmas of 1936 into January of 1937 overwhelmed the Tennessee and Cumberland rivers, along with their tributaries and, honestly, the entire Ohio and Mississippi River valleys. It was one of the worst natural disasters the United States has ever experienced. Nearly 3/4 of the city of Louisville was underwater. In Nashville, the Cumberland crested at nearly 53 feet, about 2 feet higher than the water rose in the devastating 2010 flood. Across the region, more than 200 people died and nearly 1,000 were injured. The following year, the federal government finalized a design to install larger dams up and down the major rivers affected by that flood, including the Tennessee and the Cumberland. These weren't the small lock and dam operations kind of on the sides of waterways that had been built with navigation in mind. These were major dams creating reservoirs, or man-made lakes, to help officials control and manage the flow of water, even in times of extreme rainfall. That was the genesis of what we now call Land Between the Lakes on the Kentucky line. Twin dams forming twin lakes in a spot where the Cumberland and Tennessee come very close to each other. Now, that narrow band of land between the two reservoirs eventually was turned into a federally owned recreation area where there is a concerted effort to preserve nature and help various species thrive. And that's kind of important for balancing out the scales, because for all the ways dams can help people, they create some pretty big challenges for ecosystems. Dammed rivers have less biodiversity because a lot of fish species can't get past dams and won't enter reservoirs. What are often seen as improvements from a human point of view act as walls and fences to limit the range of many aquatic animals. And without periodic small floods saturating the soil, The areas along the banks of rivers are altered too. And we talk a lot now about how the Duck River is the most biodiverse river in North America. Well, that incredible range of species may have been more common in all of our local rivers at one time, but the bigger ones were substantially changed. That matters because every species serves a purpose in the habitat. For example, crawfish break up dead matter in the water. When they die out or no longer enter a part of a river, that matter doesn't break down the same way. The water isn't as clean. Multiply that effect by every species that stops living in a waterway, and it really makes a difference. And then there are the added pressures put on a river when dams make it more attractive for practical uses. More boat traffic, more industrial sites located on rivers for easy access to barges. All of that increases the amount of harmful chemicals and plastics that can end up in the water, not to mention sewage treatment plants and their effects. Now, we do need dams. I'm certainly not suggesting they're all bad. But a report issued late last year by the Nature Conservancy says there's a lot of opportunity to reverse the negative impact they've had on Tennessee's rivers. It found that there are many older dams in the state that don't actually serve a purpose anymore. They were built to power facilities that were shut down, or they were smaller dams made irrelevant by larger projects elsewhere on a river. And so there's been an effort in recent years to start getting rid of obsolete dams, to instead let portions of our rivers be a little more natural. That's more friendly to the animals that live there. It's better for the ecosystem of the riverbanks. And it has the added bonus of making some of the state's smaller, scenic rivers easier to paddle in kayaks and canoes. Just a few minutes, how to navigate a challenging time of life. Menopause. That's coming up after the newscast.
Thematic Static on WNXP is the mixtape we make together. A themed set loosely organized by you, the listener, handpicking songs according to a theme. Airing first Thursdays at 9 a.m. and again Saturdays at 9 a.m., Thematic Static plucks your requests from the socials at WNXP Nashville and by voice memo at 615-320-9100. Thematic Static, the mixtape we make together, supported by United Record Pressing, only on WNXP.
Here's the latest from WPLN News. A 3-judge panel will soon rule on whether Tennessee's new congressional map is constitutional. Judges from West, Middle, and East Tennessee heard arguments yesterday in the first of 4 legal challenges to the new map. WPLN's Mariana Bacquiao was in the courtroom and has this report.
The NAACP has challenged Tennessee's maps before. Pretty recently, the group sued to block the 2022 maps, but the Tennessee Supreme Court sided with the state, arguing that it was too close to an election to change the maps. Now, that's the NAACP's argument, and the state says the timeline works.
Don't believe what I said before, believe what I'm saying now. When I won last time and I said this, oh, that was nonsense.
That's Anthony Ashton, senior counsel for the NAACP. For the state, Attorney Taylor Meehan argued that the cases are different because the legislature accounted for the extra cost to county governments, while a court-ordered change would not.
And those appropriations for overtime and for mailing notices, that's the real difference.
But notably absent from the arguments was the way the maps sliced up the state's only majority black voting district. Tennessee became the first state to redistrict after the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that lawmakers don't need to consider race when drawing new maps. But it's still top of mind for Ashton after the new map divided Memphis.
And that was done, as far as we can tell, solely for purposes of making sure that the people of Memphis no longer can elect candidates of their choice.
Ashton says Memphis's interests are different from the interests of surrounding rural areas. And with these maps in place, he argues Memphis will not have those interests represented in Congress. Mariana Bacquiao, WPLN News.
Tennessee prison officials aborted an execution yesterday after failing to place an IV line into Tony Carruthers' veins. WPLN's Catherine Sweeney says there will be no reports in the media about what the failed execution looked like.
Media witnesses to executions are marched into a viewing room adjoining the death chamber. There's a big window with a black curtain hanging over it. Prison guards open the curtain after the IV lines are established. Reporters take notes and share their observations in a press conference after the execution. That's what Stephen Hale of the Nashville Banner tried to do yesterday. The curtain remained closed as the staff tried and failed to place the IV.
For that hour and 20 minutes, we were sitting in a dark room and could only faintly hear what was going on. As frustrating as it is to not be able to tell you what we witnessed, that's the most we can kind of do.
In January, prison officials were ordered by a Davidson County judge to keep the curtain open the whole time. A lawsuit from the Reporters Committee for Freedom of the Press successfully argued that was necessary for government transparency. The state appealed. In April, the Tennessee Supreme Court temporarily blocked the change. That's why the curtains were closed during Carruthers' failed execution. Catherine Sweeney, WPLN News.
WPLN, the Nashville Banner, and the Associated Press were all parties to that lawsuit. Well, during yesterday's aborted execution attempt of Tony Carruthers, many who were formerly incarcerated themselves stood in the field outside the prison and kept vigil for more than 3 hours. This was Michael Sample's first visit back to Riverbend Maximum Security's grounds since his release last year. He had spent 42 years on death row and says he considers the men still inside his personal friends.
I know them as a person. I know them more than what the state claimed them to be. And you get to know them. I've been around them longer than I've been around my family. So I'm out here to support them because I know if I was in that situation, they'd do the same thing for me.
Sample says he's not concerned just about Carruthers' situation. He hopes other death penalty cases, especially those out of Shelby County, will also get more attention. Winter Storm Fern killed 29 Tennesseans earlier this year. The National Medical Examiner's Office has now confirmed at least 3 of the deaths in the city were from hypothermia. The office had already confirmed that low temperatures led to the death of 92-year-old James Mitchell in his apartment, which had lost power for multiple days. The Tennessean reports advanced age and hypertension were listed as additional contributing factors. New autopsies from the medical examiner confirm 2 more residents were killed by the cold. The senior living facility where 93-year-old Frances Pilkington lived had partially lost power before she was found unresponsive in her room. Cardiovascular disease was also a contributing factor to her death. 46-year-old Sharon Conyers was unhoused and was found unresponsive outside in bitter cold conditions near the intersection of Wedgwood and Lindell Avenue. She was declared dead at the scene. For those who need help still recovering from the winter storm, the FEMA aid application is open until June 10th. The agency has already awarded more than $36 million in assistance. The half-cent sales tax increase Nashvillians have been paying over the last year has generated roughly $165 million. That money will go directly towards transportation upgrades, says Metro's Sabrina Sussman, who's overseeing the projects.
This revenue does come with constraints, right? So this is not unconstrained revenue. It's dedicated revenue that is intended to fulfill the obligations of the projects. And so those 86 miles of sidewalk decided. The 54 miles of all-access corridor, we know where we're headed.
The sales tax increase was approved by voters in the city's successful transit referendum at the end of 2024. The vote was accompanied by a 15-year plan outlining specific projects that would be funded by the sales tax revenue. The city is just over a year into executing the plan. Sussman detailed at a recent city budget hearing how Metro wants to spend about 40% of that revenue during the upcoming fiscal year. The vast majority of the money spent, roughly $50 million, would go towards WeGo to improve the bus system. NDOT, the police department, and the Metro office overseeing the transit projects would also get roughly $5 million each. A Stewart County man has been sentenced to 24 months in prison after pleading guilty to planning an attack at a Nashville mosque. 19-year-old Gunnar Fisher was arrested in late 2024 following an FBI investigation. That came after the Facebook and Instagram parent company Meta warned of concerning messages on his accounts. WSMV reports Fisher's sentence is set to start in July and will also include years of supervised release with conditions like mental health treatment. In a statement, the American Muslim Advisory Council calls Fisher's case, quote, a wake-up call about the real threats to our community. You'll find more news anytime at WPLN.org. For generations, menopause has been the subject of misinformation and myths. And still, medical science barely understands the change because researchers have long chosen not to study women on the grounds their hormones get in the way. It was only about a decade ago that science began to seriously research menopause. So uncertainty and confusion abound, along with the idea that menopause is all gloom and doom. Here's more from This Is Nashville contributing editor Natasha Simjanovich.
One of social media's best-known OBGYNs and menopause specialists hates how long her own field has ignored women.
You don't know what you don't study. And so we have been so underserved. I mean, women are owed centuries of research.
Mary Claire Haver also hosts the Unpaused podcast, and her millions of online followers have helped turn her books on menopause and nutrition into bestsellers. Her latest is entitled The New Perimenopause, which she was recently promoting in Nashville. She says lack of research means medicine often pathologizes this years-long hormonal shift in women, treating it like a disease that, moreover, has no cure.
In the clinic, I do a lot of blood testing, right? Is this a vitamin D deficiency? What's her iron stores? Like, we're missing so many basic biologic things in women because we never bothered to pay attention and study or believe them.
Haver is helping fill dire information gaps to the delight of the dozens of women, many of them perimenopausal, who caught her book tour stop at the downtown Noel Hotel, including nurse practitioner Stacy Smith. She treats hormones for men and women in her new Brentwood clinic and says Haver is helping women get better all around without breaking the bank.
It doesn't matter how much a woman has. If they have extra money, we don't need to take it from them. We need to educate them on how to live this life. They want to go on a vacation. They don't want to spend their money on expensive treatments.
Haver's really into estrogen cream and recommends it well before menopause. But also nutrition, exercise, and a healthy dose of myth-busting that all things menopause are bad. They're not, says 54-year-old Jenny Kim.
I love this time of life. I think this is probably one of my favorite decades. I love this age. I just need a little help understanding, what my body's doing.
Her message to younger women?
Don't be afraid. You got to talk about it.
So you can also educate your doctor. Haver said she's learned more from her patients about menopause than she ever did in med school, including that, just like with menstruation, not all women's experiences are the same. But there is one issue she consistently hears.
Lots of sleep disruption. The girls aren't sleeping in perimenopause and postmenopause. Sleep is now a vital sign for cardiovascular disease, for dementia, for stroke, for mental health.
Haver says it can improve after the change. Granted, that's according to the only U.S. study to date on postmenopausal brain functioning and so-called brain fog.
Actually, that we see a leveling of our neurotransmitters, so a lot of that gets better. A lot of the mental health gets better in postmenopause.
Another plus, says Haver, is no more worries about unexpected pregnancy. It's a sense of freedom she shares with many of her patients.
They also are just more accepting and loving of themselves and their bodies. And I really see this resurgence of women really just going for it, with their own sexuality, where they never have before.
Haver says she's been living her best life post-menopause and wants to teach all women to do the same. For Nashville Public Radio, I'm Natasha Sinyanovich.
We do this roundup of Nashville news every workday, which means the podcast will be taking Monday off for Memorial Day. If you like this, you'll probably enjoy the Nashville Villager newsletter, too. You'll get perspective from more of my colleagues at Nashville Public Radio and links to the stories we're following. Sign up for those daily emails at WPLN.org/NashVillager. Thanks so much for listening. Let's make this day a good one, and we'll catch back up next week.